All right, the Hangout is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I am Mike McCain.
Tonight, we're talking about Episode 7 of Survivor, Season 35, Merge. Merge. I found myself more excited than I expected by the Merge. Not that Merge isn't always an interesting time in any season, but I don't know, just the enthusiasm everybody had, like when with Ben saying it's like, the Merge, this is when Survivor starts. And that sort of, I don't know, that energy to it kind of got me pumped, like, yeah, kicking it into high gear now, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it was all, the episode helped in that it was entertained. Like it became more entertaining than the previous ones have been. Like it's kind of the payoff of all of the, the groundwork. Okay, well, what are we going to do now that we've got idols in play and we've got, two, 3, 4 different factions? Like, how's it all going to play out? And so that made it almost more interesting in comparison, because not that it hasn't been interesting, but as we've talked about a number of times, it's been a lot of like getting to know people and like laying the groundwork, and this is the payoff. And because of that, I think that's why you were probably more excited. I was more excited, because now we're in the payoff time.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it too, just thinking back on some of the other episodes, is I think bigger groups is just more interesting. Like having the 3 tribes is interesting in some ways, but as soon as you start having the groups be smaller, I don't know. It's just like fewer combinations.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But I mean, certainly the more people you have, the more different possible ways the strategy could go. And then you save the times when it's fewer and fewer, and you have that be, the end game stuff where it's like, okay, now it's come down to it, and we are now left with the people that we've been with all season, and so we know them better, and it's been this winnowing process as opposed to starting there.
Yes. I also think that I don't know if you want to call it the battle lines or whatever, but I think it was a really interesting like way to go, because you have, we've always seen Chrissy as sort of like, she's kind of underrated, in the way that she manages to, be strategic, like actually get through, and to see her actually get targeted, but still manage to come out of it with a very, very successful outcome, in the fact that, you got an idol played and the person that you voted for out.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And she kind of stepped forward a bit too, I think. And it's whether that happened before or after people started targeting her, it wasn't entirely clear. We could imagine it being a slightly evolving process. But she definitely
similar, like it was almost like, whether or not they were specifically doing it, like I think she's got a good pulse of this and knew that this was starting to change in a way that you needed to, if you didn't grab a hold of it, you could be the one sitting there wondering what just happened.
Right.
Which is what happened to Jessica,
Yeah. Yeah. When you get comfortable and you think that it's under control, like that's when it will fall apart on you. Whereas what Chrissy did was almost the opposite of that, in the sense that she could have probably just stayed below the radar, just kind of keep riding it along and letting other people make the bigger moves. But in this episode, she kind of took a more proactive approach and started acting more like a leader of the little group that she had around her. and people were listening.
Yeah.
So we started off the episode with her talking about trying not to smile as Allie left. And I thought it was an interesting sort of element because it felt sincere, but it was definitely that element of, I do feel bad for her, like as a person, but her leaving is absolutely good for me and is what I wanted to have happen. So how can I not be happy about that? And so we're kind of acknowledging the conflict, but also the kind of natural humor in trying to put on the face because, like, in a genuine way, you don't want to hurt their feelings and rub their face in it. It would be mean and unhelpful regardless, and so there's no reason to do it, but there's just an element of, but you are actually happy.
Yeah.
So I liked that, and I liked, too, her pragmatic look at the two key allies that she has formed here, and being aware that it's like they're each closer to me than they are to each other, which is a good place for me to be. You know, so if anything, each of them would try to bring me into whatever they might do rather than them plotting against me.
Yep.
Yep. That's a good place to be.
It is a good place to be.
Mm-hmm. So in the morning, where everyone's talking about getting ready for the challenge, and we'll talk more about this later, but just the idea that they really had a whole challenge set up there that was apparently actually just for show. Or wait, was that the place where they did the immunity challenge? No, it can't be, because the immunity challenge was an individual one, and that was definitely a 3-tribe setup.
Yeah, I guess I didn't even pay attention to this.
Yeah.
So I can't talk much more about it. I was
Anyway,
part of the episode. Yeah, when I'm kind of getting set up and everything into it. Yeah.
Well, that was a little bit later anyway. They're just talking about getting ready, and Cole talking about being really confident with their 5 that, they're not worried about whatever the prior, tribe alliances were. He's pretty sure that this 5 that they've got here is really solid and going to take that group into the merge. And it's kind of typical of behavior we've seen from Cole so far for him to, everything's great. Nobody has told me that it's not, therefore it must be fine. Because that's the standard he has apparently for his behavior is, if nobody said anything, then it must be you're okay.
Yeah. He is not likely to win this.
No, I don't think so. He is, like if he makes it to the end at this point, it will be that sort of like you bring them to the end because they won't win.
Right.
But in any event, so
disaster that we want him around so that we get the.
Well, he's so oblivious and like he's really self-involved, like this jumps ahead, but when he like the whole bit where he's apologizing to Ben, it's an interesting sort of behavior, because on the one hand, we can believe that he's sincere in not wanting to have hurt people and being sorry, especially now that it affects him and the fact that people don't like him and don't trust him, and wanting to fix that. But fixing it in his mind involves making everybody else his babysitter to tell him whenever he's doing something wrong so he can fix it then. Like it's on them to make sure that he behaves properly.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting way to. I hadn't thought of it like that. That makes sense.
Because, Ben is kind of saying, yeah, it was bothering me. I mean, I didn't say anything, but, and Cole's like, well, I wish you had. I wish, you know, if I had known. And it's kind of like, well, dude, you know, like, it should be on you to be considerate and aware of the feelings of the people around you and think about those things. And Ben says, well, it's like the fish. You catch a fish and you bring it in. He's like, yeah, I just never even thought about it. I just caught the fish and ate it myself. It just didn't even occur to me that these other hungry people at camp might want some food too. Didn't even occur to him. And at that point, Ben's got to just be saying, it's like, look, fine, you're sorry, but I don't see any evidence whatsoever that you are capable of proactively thinking about the feelings of other people. You know, it's like, now that you realize there's a problem, you're sorry and you want to make it retroactively better.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, it's, on the one hand, you know, I think it's also true. It is not going to bring any politic element into it, but it's one thing to say that you're sorry about something and mean it and really want to be better, and that's good. And you've got to be aware that you're going to be on probation moving forward, right? But it's also true that a lot of people, when they apologize for a bad behavior, it's clear what they want is to try to figure out what magic words will make this whole thing just go away and not be a problem anymore.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of jumping ahead to the apology, but just the point up here of him just saying, oh yeah, our 5's totally strong. We're just going to keep this group and it'll all be fine. And I don't have to think about it.
Right. It's back to that's like just oblivious. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's, yeah. So it's a little, I mean, it's more selectively than like the fish one, you know, where that's sort of his own creation. But yeah, the fact that like, I don't even have to play the game right now because we have 5 strong.
Yeah.
Ugh,
It's
okay.
yeah, and the thing is too that like it's really not even, there's no legitimacy to him trying to pretend he had no way to know, because like we talked about how in a previous episode that Jessica felt the need to kind of actually pull him aside and try to coach him into be more aware of the fact that people are irritated by your behavior. But yeah, in any event, we cut right from him being confident to Ben saying, well, sure, having the numbers is nice, but I don't trust Cole, and him and Jessica together is potentially even worse. So I'm not really happy about that plan. Yeah. And then meanwhile, we go over to Ashley and Devin and Joe and Desi. And we never really get payoff to that particular 2 versus 2 dynamic because of the merge. But they're all so hungry they can't argue much anyway. Dragging their feet while they walk around. It made me wonder, like, obviously, I think we can acknowledge that the hunger element of the game is probably one of the hardest to appreciate from, you know, our perspective, right? Just the to fully comprehend what they're going through in those moments. But it does occur to me to wonder how much of them being completely out of food is down to things like they didn't go fishing very much, or they didn't have the fishing kit, or they just didn't win the challenges, or things like that. You know what I mean? It's like it always makes me wonder how they probably standardize how much rice and so on each tribe gets but then when they mix it up, you might have someone who was on a tribe that was rationing very carefully get swapped to one that was very, eating a lot of it. And so suddenly they don't have the reserves and now there's none left.
Right.
I don't know.
I always wonder about that too, because it feels like you could catch enough fish to like not be fat and happy, but at least to the point where you're not like deteriorating.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, your body resets like that. I mean, once you've gone enough days, like your body starts to just learn to operate with lower amounts of food. Like we're built to be able to fast like for a long period of time.
People did survive for thousands and thousands of years before there were grocery stores.
Yeah. So I'm always also curious about that, whether it's just, something that's true and they're just not used to dealing with the hardship of it. And that's what they created more of it in their mind. Or I don't know.
I mean, it occurred to me as soon as I was kind of saying, people survived by foraging and hunting and gathering and all of that stuff. But it's also true that in history, lots of people starved to death. I mean, that's also a thing.
It is. But they're not put in a position where they're going to starve to death.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not really going to die, of course. I mean, even though we have Ashley saying, no joke, if we don't get food today, we might die. And it's kind of like you're using it. It's like people who say literally when they mean figuratively, and society has apparently just given up on that one. But
I had something that was literally a decision somebody made at work, literally set us back 5 years, and I made sure to explain to them that I wasn't embellishing, that they literally did make a decision to start doing something that we used to do 5 years ago, and they literally set us back. So, I mean, maybe it was just me and people didn't understand, but I was trying to be very clear that I haven't given up on it, and this was literally what happened.
On the same token of that whole question, though, about the literally versus figuratively, the follow-up explanation of which one you actually mean has almost become part of the American idiom. You know what I mean? That's clarifying, okay, I said literally, but I actually mean literally and not figuratively. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I just did that. So
yeah, exactly. So in any event, they're not really going to die. But at the same time, they're obviously very weak. They're very hungry, and it's a thing. And whether that is the result of poor planning or ineffective fishing on their part, hard to say. But, could be any number of things. And it just makes me wonder if anyone has ever, like, obviously the producers must keep stats on things that we never see, that never make it to air, right? Like, patterns of the way people ration out their food. How much fish do people catch? I mean, I'm sure that they track these things, right? They've got to have doctors and nutritionists paying attention to all that stuff.
Yeah, and I doubt they're like calorie counting them, but at least like you said, patterns and general idea of what are people's nutritional status look like.
Yeah, not least because they don't want anyone to actually die out there.
Literally.
Yeah, so I'm sure that the amount of food that they get from season to season is probably specifically planned based on the idea of, well, how much food do we think they're likely to be able to forage or catch? And how much do we want to supplement so that they're hungry, but not literally wasting away, unable to move?
Right.
Anyway, though, so we get to the challenge, and Probst actually comments on Desi trekking up Mount Everest as she climbs this little 5-foot sand dune. And then we get this whole bit like, so it's what I'm fine, and I'm amused with the whole idea that they have a challenge set up that is apparently just for show. And everyone seemed like they're pretty sure it's going to be merge anyway. No one seemed really shocked. But I don't object either to the idea of a restaurant-sponsored feast. That's fine. But the whole bit of there's usually a feast, and you've started to think that this season we do things a little differently. Well, it is going to be different. There's no feast, except, yeah, there's a feast.
I think that's why I missed the fake challenge thing, because I was so lost in the because I have all that in my notes. So I was so sort of befuddled by the way that this like thing went down that it just made me completely not even notice that they were in a challenge scenario.
Well, I noticed partly because I had seen on the scenes from next week last time that it showed them all going to a beach that very distinctly had the red, blue, and yellow setups.
Mm.
And so we didn't get a good look at whatever it might have been, but it looked like it was designed to be a challenge fake out. I don't know. But it's definitely, I feel like if they're looking for a way to actually surprise people, I do recommend that at some point they mix up the way they do the merge. I don't know. Actually, I maybe take that back, because on the one hand, I think that would be a way to actually surprise people, to really substantively change the way they do that. But at the same time, I don't know if they want to really mess with some of the fundamental structure of the game that way.
Sometimes like the predictability of it and the way the rules work like makes it part of the fun,
Yeah. Because people start to make decisions based on how soon they think the merge will be.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question becomes, do you want them to be, like, whether they're right or not, do you want it to be predictable in the sense that is it more interesting strategically to have people guessing that way and not necessarily be way off the mark?
Right.
Because I think the only time they didn't do a merge for a long time. Oh, sorry.
No, I was going to say, we talked about, the idea behind it. Sometimes you need to have the merge because otherwise, like, even like you said on this one, like you start to whittle tribes down to the point that it's less interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you don't want to mess with that too much because there's a reason why there's a sweet spot for where the merge happens, and there's a reason why you want to feed them and get them all in a position where, they can operate at peak, mental stimulation when they've merged. Like there's probably a windfall to the rest of the season when they get this, less contentious and also full of fuel opening.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to like merging and then going straight into strategy talk, like you let everybody kind of get their guard down, but then also get full
right
and plan.
And it's almost part of the tradition at this point too, because on the one hand, it's one thing to mix things up, but like the merge feast it's a threshold that's been crossed, right? Like it's like what Ben says is like, the merge is when Survivor starts. It's this idea of not only creating that element of, breaking up the routine, but also just celebrating a specific transition. Did I lose yours?
No.
Oh, you just didn't say anything?
Oh, yeah. No.
Okay.
Maybe I lost you, and that it was didn't catch the cue for.
Oh, okay. Well, I looked like I saw your mouth. Anyway, it's fine. So, in general, I think if they really did change up the way they do the merge, that would be surprising, but I'm not sure it would be a good surprise.
Yeah.
So everyone is happy, and there's all the kind of nonsense about like, it's a challenge, but wait, no, it's a merge, and there's a feast, but wait, no, there's not a feast, but there actually is a feast. It's just a sponsored feast, and I wanted to pretend like it's not, and now go over there and eat steaks.
Yes, and it was as awkward of a
Yeah.
sponsored feast as it could have been.
Yeah. Cole was very compliant with the sponsor pleasing confessional language, brand name and all that.
I feel like there is a part that happens that we don't see where they give them like a couple of talking points, the same as you would in a radio or a podcast.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Cole is just so oblivious to like how to even make that sound natural that it sounds ridiculous. Like, I guarantee he didn't come up with the line, the steak just literally falls off the bone. This Outback steak is amazing. Like,
yeah,
they were like, they probably said, mention something about, how good and tender the steak is. Some examples could be the steak falls right off the bone, melts in my mouth. And he like said like all of the examples in like one big long sentence because of, again, the obliviousness to like how this works. Because, we obviously on this show are not sponsored by any means, but you either have participated in or listened to enough podcasts that you know how those reads work. Like it'll say something like, talk about an experience you had using our product. Some examples could be, and sometimes you'll read a podcast and depending on the snarkiness of the host, they sometimes will directly read the read. So you're in on the joke and it says, say something nice about our product. Yeah. Oh wait, I'm supposed to actually say something nice about but it felt like he felt like that without the snark. Like he didn't even know how to deliver the read correctly.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like out of everybody on the season right now, if I were to pick one of them who in his secret heart of hearts just wants to be on TV after this, it's Cole.
Yeah.
He's got that good looking but kind of dumb, goofy energy to him.
Yes.
I mean, this like there's a TV market demand for that type of person. Where were we? Oh yeah. So that said, as awkward as these sponsored things can sometimes be, it did look pretty good. I couldn't help but feel a little bit hungry watching that and just like, oh yeah, and got those great big beer glasses and just and the whole weird little bit about Joe being delighted that he can order 2 steaks and they'll bring them to him. Like, what? And then just like revisiting it later when someone like, what, you got a second steak? Yeah, I got 2 steaks and 3 desserts. And
yeah, like, there's no rules.
Just right.
It's just right. Like, it's whatever I want. They literally have no rules. It's amazing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Secret to everybody, if you go to a real Outback Steakhouse and say the code word Survivor, you too can order 2 steaks and then pay for both of them. Anyway, I like the merge feasts, and so having it be sponsored, I don't know, I have no objection whatsoever. They used to do a lot more sponsored sorts of things. I'm glad they stopped doing like the movie night ones. Those were always a little extra awkward, especially because the movies were never like good.
Yeah, like it was
like Jack and Jill one year or something.
Right, they weren't getting like a sneak peek of the new Star Wars.
Yeah. But in any event, we have Devin talking about figuratively going from rags to riches. And then we have Chrissy talking about finding Joe really loud and obnoxious. And I kind of liked the way that she said it is, having now met him, I am really grateful for all of the time before now that I hadn't. That's not quite what she said. It was something to that effect. But just, yeah, it's like, yeah, I could see that. Joe does seem like he's probably a little bit grating in that regard. And he's certainly acting it too. I mean, he's always a little over the top, but I think he was probably extra excited because he got 2 steaks.
Yes.
Then we have Jessica talking about also kind of still assuming that their 5 was going to be the way to go, but they needed 2 more. And so they were thinking, bring in Joe and Desi. That seems like that's what makes sense to her. But Chrissy is concerned about Joe. Like she's like, I'm not really sure I want to be working with him. That doesn't seem like it's necessarily the great plan. There was interesting. What did you think about the bit where she's trying to talk strategy with Ben at the table, and he's kind of like, they're right behind you. And she's like, oh, they can't hear me. And then we pull away, and they're like literally sitting next to her on a picnic bench. And it's just like, I mean, maybe she was right that they couldn't hear her. They were talking, there was wind, whatever, but it
did seem like, yeah, like she was like literally just talking right in front of them.
Yeah. And him just kind of doing this little bit of like,
yeah, like, please stop doing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
I wonder if there was just a little bit of people who haven't been eating very much for 2 weeks get beer. That might have been part of what was going on there.
Also true.
But so in any event, we have returning from the feast, a whole bit with the running theme of Cole being oblivious and specifically talking about, oh yeah, we got all these supplies, and I thought, there might be an advantage somewhere, and I looked for one but didn't find one, even as we have a shot of him grabbing a nail from the bundle of nails and pulling it out of a little paper tube wrapped in the bundle of nails. Technically speaking, I suppose the shot of the hand pulling the nail out, he was talking over it, but I guess we don't know that it was his hand.
Right. Like they could have shown that he
did mention the nails.
And that is where it was located, but it wasn't as close as.
For all we know, it was a producer's hand, like to get us the shot, that sort of thing. But Cole did mention the nails in his whole little speech, and we see that is where it was. So
yeah.
And so for him to, he said he was looking. So I suppose we can give him credit for the awareness that there might be something and that maybe looking for it's not a terrible idea, but he obviously didn't find it.
Yes. This is where we also get it's a little Jessica talking about like how great of a position that she's in and that she is like the queen.
The other thing with Jessica that I can't believe I forgot to mention, I didn't actually make a note about it, but I just remembered of during the feast and her talking about, the lava cakes, and just like, it's just chocolate thunder from down under. And I just felt like naughty saying that because I'm a virgin. And I'm like,
yeah.
All right, never mind. Just, yep, you're fine. You're good.
It's always a silly name.
Yeah, I wanted that gif of Nathan Fillion from Serenity where he's doing that. Should I say something? Oh, I feel like I should. No, never mind. I'll just.
Nope.
Anyway, we have. So Jessica talking about feeling good about where they're at, especially given that she approaches Desi with this idea of bringing in Desi and Joe. And Desi actually plays that really smart, I think, in the sense of saying, yes, definitely bring me on board with your plan and I'll bring in Joe, but don't worry, we can cut him loose when we need to. Which is exactly the right thing to say, because I think everyone is aware that Joe would be great for a vote or two, but maybe not long-term planning.
Yep.
Yeah, so I thought Desi played that really smart, even though obviously kind of it didn't work out. It was ultimately speaking the wrong side to join. But you don't have any way to know that up front.
Right.
Let's see. I lost my place in the notes. Oh, here we are. We have Ryan really happy to be able to reconnect with Devin. And then saying that, hey, you and we can bring in Lauren and JP and Chrissy and start forming a little coalition here. And I like, him doing the heavy lifting to bring the theme back in. A hustler doesn't wait. A hustler makes alliances. It's like, yeah, okay, that's pretty legit. Yeah.
Yeah.
On point with the theme. And Devin talks about the hustlers having kind of been under the radar because it was the healers and the heroes kind of battling for challenge dominance. And so thinking of each other as the bigger threat, and also kind of just because the hustlers dwindled in numbers. So, but it puts them kind of now, it's like, well, what are they in a swing position where they can kind of look either way? Maybe. You know what I just realized this episode? I don't feel like I saw a single shot of JP the whole episode.
He was involved in,
Like maybe he's in one of the group shots or something. I mean, I'm not like suggesting a conspiracy where he was literally cut out of the episode or anything. We didn't hear anything from him.
Chrissy was talking about how like both Ryan and JP wanted to work with her.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was about it. I mean, I think he might, like you said, he might have been in like some of the conversations that they were talking about, like to get rid of Jessica. Yeah. But
I mean, to be fair, there was a lot going on in this episode, and he, as we've previously discussed, is not always the most interesting on camera compared to some of the other people on the season so far. Like, it doesn't make him a bad guy. It's just he's going to get comparatively less screen time, probably.
Yep.
But in any event, Devin tries to bring in, Lauren at Ryan's suggestion, but that kind of backfires a little bit because she's thinking more like, why would we do that when there's this whole ready-made group of healers that if we join them, we're an obvious majority? Why wouldn't we just do that? That seems like, she's got a point from that respect, but it also means that as soon as you've eliminated everybody else, you're now the minority and they're still a block.
So, very true.
It could go either way. I mean, there's no wrong answer, right? It's just different paths. But in any event, though, she immediately goes to Mike and tells him everything that she just heard from Devin. In the meantime, Devin is still making the rounds, trying to build this little coalition. It's interesting seeing him be so proactive in this, too, because we might think of, if Devin and Ryan are this partnership, we might expect Ryan to be the one to go around and do all the scheming. Yep. But we see Devin doing it instead. So he approaches Chrissy and Ben, and we see Ben kind of wavering.
Yeah, Ben, I think, was an underrated key to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I think so too. Do you want to elaborate? I agree, but go ahead.
I think he he didn't get a lot of credit for this, but his desire to like really go against Cole,
Mm-hmm.
I think shaped more of this, even though like, because like Cole apologizes to him and we get the little confessional of, oh, it might further my game. But I think deep down, like he really lobbied and may have been what kind of pushed Chrissy to have to make these moves earlier, because he probably was also getting some intel. Now that I was saying like maybe Chrissy had this on a radar, I'm starting to think that Ben might have been the one who knew that Chrissy was getting some heat. And Chrissy, to be fair, like she was a vote in 2 of the last tribal councils. Like she didn't lose, but she has been voted on both of the last times. But then you have Ben, who is just determined. He has the partnership with Lauren where they work this like, it made it positioned it like they were swing votes. But I feel like that's where I say it's underrated, as I think that Ben might have had more influence on what everybody chose to do and making sure that Lauren went the way that he wanted and not necessarily was truly a swing.
Yeah. Well,
that's because of all the stuff we saw with Cole in particular. The Jessica vote, to me, felt like a Cole vote, but with the more dangerous of the Cole-Jessica duo.
Right. Well, and I feel like also, I mean, we'll get into the whole bit where they made their plan, but I definitely agree that the vote for Jessica was a vote against the coalition, which includes Cole, and probably a big part of that is not wanting to work with Cole. But I mean, I absolutely agree. And I mean, this was still like, even though obviously one side won, this was a narrow margin. One person flipping to the other side would have changed the outcome.
Yep.
So him being in a position where he has one group of people who expect him to vote with them and another group of people saying, hey, how about you vote with us instead? There were several people who maybe could have gone either way, but we definitely know that he thought about both outcomes and made a decision based on not trusting Cole.
Right. And and I guess where my elaboration of is underrated is that I feel like he might have had more influence on some of those decisions than it made it seem. Like it wasn't just like, oh, he and Lauren just decided to go this way. I think that they put some machinations in place, or he did, that put them in a position where that made the most sense for him.
Yeah, I could definitely believe it. I mean, he seems like a smart guy, and he was definitely there in the middle of several of those strategy discussions.
Yes.
So let's see. We also have Jessica being starting to pick up on some of the potential issues, and in particular, where Cole is causing problems. People are irritated by his behavior, and that is potentially going to be a reason for people to not vote with them. And Ben in particular, she thinks is wavering. And of course, we know that she's right. But again, it's, she's chosen her allies at this point. So it's like, I suppose, once you're invested, you don't necessarily you can't just flip on everybody, right?
Right.
But in any event, I think the whole dynamic with her and Cole all season has been weird, because she's like, she crushes on him, but then periodically seems to recognize that he's maybe not great, but she's still got that infatuation going. There's some hormones involved, maybe.
Yeah, I'm unsure what is the.
Well, he's nice to her and he smiles at her and he's good looking. I don't want to undersell Jessica, because I think that there's been several occasions where when she's talking to the camera by herself, she's actually seems pretty sharp, but she definitely had a blind spot when it came to Cole, or at least a willingness to forgive beyond what most other people would put up with.
Right.
We have Ben talking to Mike and maybe sort of pitching Mike on joining the other side, but Mike is a little bit worried about that. And then we get this inexplicable confession from Dr. Mike of, I thought I was the only one playing, and it turns out everyone is. And kind of want to just like, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. To the extent that you thought you were the only one playing, I mean, that's like that old saying about, like, if you don't know who the sucker at the table is, you know, if you think that you've made it to the merge and you are the only one thinking about strategy on a game like this, it just means that nobody else is talking strategy with you.
Right.
And that's not good.
Nope.
In any event, though, he seems still pretty sharp, and we do see people involving him in strategy. I mean, we saw Lauren go straight to him, for example. So he's not out of the loop, but it was just a weird, dumb thing to say, this assumption that he's the only one really playing. Anyway, though, this brings us to the first individual immunity challenge with Spinny Hoop Ball.
They said this was like all brand new, right? I wrote that down.
I think so. I certainly don't recall ever seeing it before.
Yeah, I think they called. Well, I wrote down that they called attention to it being brand new.
I mean, that may well be true. I just didn't notice them say that. So, yeah, I mean, I believe it.
Something at the end, like, you know, like Desi is the first person to ever win this spinny hoop thing, you know.
Ryan went out so fast I didn't even notice until they pointed it out later.
Who, Ryan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I literally had in my notes that Mike went out first. And then I had to rewind it because it's like it happened so fast I didn't even catch it. And so later they were talking about, like, oh, everyone's been up there for 30 minutes and Ryan went out after 2 seconds. How much longer is that? How many times? Which is a fun little thing, that bit.
It is, but this is also part of where I think, you know, when I wrote down my original theory that, you know, before I started talking myself into, like, Ben maybe giving her some intel, where Chrissy, I think, you know, because so she started doing the math, and it just felt like she knew that by doing the math, she felt it after the first one, that it kind of flagged her up as like, oh wait, like she's not that she can do the math, but just the calculus of not just the math part, but like the whole of how the game is going to work. Like all of a sudden people are starting to, like, you can kind of feel there's like this resistance to her knowing that. But she got to a point where it was like, do I try to dumb this down or do I just own it? And it felt like she made a decision to just own it. And then that carried her through to, okay, well, now that this is where I'm at, and I've put it out there that I'm thinking through these things and I've got this like kind of quick snap intelligence and I can run these numbers and I can figure out all this and I'm doing good with the social game. Like, well, now I got to own it because it's out of the box. Not that it wasn't already, like I said, she'd already been voted for the last two councils and was a consideration in the very first tribal council of the season.
Right. But yeah, I agree.
I think kind of was the tipping point.
Yeah,
you know,
it was the stepping forward, right?
Right. As opposed to like, oh, I've put myself out there. Do I try to hide behind it and not own it, or do I just step forward and own it? And in the weird moment of it just being part of the challenge, like that's where I felt like she owned it, you know.
Yeah. And we've seen that sort of thing backfire before. Like I'm forgetting who the name. I want to say Michelle, but I don't think that's right. Where in her first season she got herself voted out by laying out strategy in a very concise way and drawing little diagrams in the sand, and everyone kind
No,
of said,
that
"Wow,
was,
she's really smart. Let's get rid of her."
that was I know who you're talking about because
Yeah, and then she came back on the next season and did better.
right, yeah, it was a returning player, Michaela. That's why you're
Michaela,
thinking.
yes, Michaela.
Yeah, Michaela. Yes,
But
yeah,
then
Michaela was like, well, here's what's going to happen, and this, and all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a minute, like, which one of these rocks am I that you've already thought through to the end where you win? You know, like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So, in any event, though, I liked that moment where I think that you're exactly right of her doing the math, not only in the literal sense of answering Prost's question, but deciding that it was time to kind of be willing to step forward and say, okay, people are starting to notice, so let's own that. I like it. I like it. It's dangerous, but at the same time, it starts setting an expectation. It starts laying out a case that if she makes it to the end, she can say, I played hard. I played well. Here I am. Give me $1 million.
Yes, I think, and as I said, like the way this was going, this was the right time for this move, and I'm glad that she chose to do it. Not only because it is interesting. Do I think she did it well? She was a target. She became the target, you know, and the only way that she wouldn't have been is if she had not chosen to do the math. But that just it's so counter to her personality. Like this felt like more what she's wanted to do, and it's nice when it kind of lines up like that.
Yep.
It's like it's the reverse of what we always talk about, where they go back and pretend that just doing something they wanted to do was their strategy. It's when what I'm good at and what I want to do aligns with what is accurately my best strategy at that time. That's much more fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it's it reminds me of a phrase we use in improv, which is play to the top of your intelligence. And what that means in an improv context is that, let's say you have a scene where someone's going to the auto mechanic. It is super easy to play the mechanic as a dumb auto mechanic. Well, maybe we just need to put ketchup in the gas tank and that'll fix it. You know, like it's easy to just make up dumb stuff, but that's not very funny. It's way more interesting to say, well, I know. I'm
joking, but I go with your point. Yeah.
Yes. So the point, though, is that it is more interesting for the scene that you play, instead of the worst auto mechanic in the world, you play the best auto mechanic in the world. You know, like, with my secret techniques, your car now runs on lettuce. Or something like that, like, I don't know why I've got a food theme on it, but the point being, the scenes are going to be more interesting. It's going to be funnier if you play to the top of your intelligence. Don't be stupid, even though being a stupid character is easy. And so playing ambitiously is interesting, and more interesting than kind of holding back.
Yes.
The challenge came down to Desi and Ashley, who both kept going for a long time. But eventually, Desi wins. Yay! That's winning those individual immunity challenges, especially early on, has got to feel great in terms of like a personal accomplishment, but it's definitely always going to be one of those double-edged sword sort of things, right? It's kind of like nobody's really been paying attention to you, but they are now.
Yep.
Yep. And in some ways, too, you run the risk of kind of a worst case scenario, which is more like what Ashley had, which is this idea of people noticed that you were really good in that challenge and you didn't win.
Right.
But coming out of the challenge, we have Cole with that same big old smile going, well, gosh, I think I'm in trouble. People are mentioning my name. I guess apparently I've rubbed Ben the wrong way with food stuff, and he's just still got that big old innocent smile. And I'm like, you still are not processing this on anything but the surface level, it seems like.
Right. Yeah.
And then here's where we got this whole apology sequence that we talked about a little bit earlier, in the sense that he's going in there and he's saying the words that will make Ben not mad at him anymore. That's like his approach here. Like, and I'm sure he feels bad. Like, he's not a monster in that regard. He's just self-absorbed.
Right.
And so it's like he's not malicious. He's just oblivious. And it reminds me, there's a still from BoJack Horseman. Have you watched that show at all?
I've seen it, but I'm not a standard.
I really love the show, and I won't necessarily get into a long explanation of why, but it's very surreal. It's a cartoon where there's all sorts of animal people, and it's a lot of Hollywood parody stuff like that. But it's actually a surprisingly nuanced depiction of things like clinical depression and substance abuse and mental illness problems. Like, it's an unusual show. But there's a show that is really not played for laughs at all, where kind of the long-suffering comic relief best friend of the main character, who's sort of a sad sack narcissist character, finally is fed up, and he lets him have it, and he says, you can't just keep doing shitty things and then feeling bad because that makes it feel better. You have to do better. You have to be better. Like, this idea of like feeling bad about doing something bad doesn't stop you apparently from doing bad things again. You know, feeling bad doesn't matter. Changing your behavior is what matters. And I've not seen evidence yet that that's going to happen.
Right.
So that's kind of the vibe I got from Cole is, well, I don't want you to be mad at me. So I'm going to try to have you not be mad at me anymore.
Right.
But in any event, we have, let's see, we have Joe approaching Cole, kind of moving in where Ben left him with an uneasy, like not quite accepting the apology. But then we have Joe moving in and saying, you know, you and I, we're the obvious targets here. And at that point in my notes, I'm like, did anyone mention Joe before that? It seemed like everyone was talking about Cole. But I guess that's not entirely true. I mean, we had heard from like a couple of people that they find Joe obnoxious, Chrissy, and we knew Lauren already felt that way. And, you know, so it's like, well, wait, now am I right, Lauren, not liking Joe? That's not right. They weren't. I can't even remember now. But the point is, I guess, Joe being in
Mike
a weird...
wanted to go for Christy. Lauren and Ben were the ones talking about sticking together.
Yeah.
And then the idol came up, and that's where the whole group of them with Chrissy involved, that was where they decided they felt the idol thing from Joe or whatever, and that's when they decided to vote for Jessica.
But we actually, so like we see that sequence in the episode after this bit where Joe approaches Cole.
Right.
And it's an interesting tactic from Cole, or from Joe rather, to say, I know people are potentially thinking of voting for me because I'm, you know, they're threatened by me. So I'm going to secretly ally with the one other person they're talking about instead of just letting them vote you out. And I'm kind of unclear. I, Christiana, am not speaking in Joe's voice anymore. I am unclear. Why would you make a big thing about taking the side of the one other person that might get voted out instead of you?
Because you make it unclear who they should vote for.
I guess.
Because the idol now, because you've made it clear that you two are working together, you could use the idol for either of you if you guess right, you know?
Yeah, I suppose that might have been the thinking.
Right, so they just wisely chose to vote for option C. Or
yeah, which was pretty smart on their part. Like that whole discussion I thought was really great, actually, of first of all, them kind of being aware Joe is kind of an idol finding machine. So we think it's possible, even likely, that he might have one. And everybody knows that we've been talking about Cole and Joe. So if an idol was going to get played, it would be for one of them. So maybe what we do is we say, okay, well, we try to keep up the idea that it's going to be one of them so that the idol gets played on one of them and we vote for someone else. And obviously that only works if you actually have the numbers to make that happen, which turns out they only barely did. But nonetheless, it all went according to plan and it worked. So good on them.
Yeah, I mean, and they didn't even have to split the votes. Like they could.
They didn't have enough people to split the votes.
Right, and that's where what I liked about what they did is instead of trying to like recruit more people to get that really, really narrow margin of splitting the votes, they were just like, well, let's just target somebody who's not likely to get the idol and put it all in for that.
Yep. So I liked that scene a lot, that whole bit where they're all kind of sitting on the beach. And Chrissy's really kind of acting like the leader of the group, you know? I mean, she's obviously listening to everybody. She's not telling them what to do, but she's speaking with authority when they have their discussion.
Yes.
So that, let's see. I think I think we covered everything, because the bit about Lauren approaching Ben and their disagreement about the plan was actually at this point, but we kind of covered that already.
Yeah, again, I think that was more thrown in there to kind of throw us off guard a little bit more than it was actually like the true disagreement. I think that was just like a continuing discussion of what they were working to do. And they made it seem like there was a disagreement just so that we would be off guard.
Yeah. So that brings us to Tribal Council, and I want to just go ahead and say that I hope Joe stays on the show as long as possible, just for how interesting he makes the Tribal Councils, because he is just absolutely insistent on cutting through all of the diplomatic doublespeak that everybody tries to do to avoid giving Probst wedge questions. You know, like everyone's kind of saying, so he starts out like, well, so, you know, now that we're emerged, how much do the original tribes inform the play versus the groups that you were just in? And everybody kind of goes, well, some, but not all. And everyone's kind of giving this sort of generic answer, which is, I mean, that's the right answer. It's true, right? But it's also kind of doesn't give him anything, right? But then it's like, oh, okay, so, well, you know, who all is feeling nervous here? And everyone kind of is generically talking about, oh, everybody's nervous. And then, like, Joe's kind of like, wait a minute. How's everybody nervous? There's only been 3 names mentioned that we're even talking about. So why would everyone feel nervous? That's silly.
Yes. Yeah, that stuff is hilarious.
Yeah. And I also loved the weird little double act that he and Cole were playing with this whole thing about, like, you know, Oh, why would everybody be nervous? See, like what I'm thinking right here is that what people ought to be saying is that they're not nervous. They ought to be saying that they're sitting here, they trust their allies, and they're not worried. And then Cole goes, I want everybody to know that I trust you and I'm not worried.
Yeah, and I'm not worried. Yeah.
And then he did it again later.
Yeah.
I thought that was so amazing. I liked that a lot. Also good on Mike for a surprisingly well realized and funny impression of Joe.
Yeah.
Just kind of out of nowhere. It's just like, oh, look, he does a Joe impression and it's pretty good. In a way that's not mean-spirited. It's definitely recognizable. Everybody gets it, but it wasn't mean. And he kind of simultaneously, I was actually fairly impressed with this idea that he tells an anecdote that is kind of simultaneously about Joe's Joe, gotta love him, but also here's how this bit about how he almost tried to screw me over at the beginning of the game, but we're cool now.
Yeah.
And then everybody says deuces for a little while. That sort of thing. And then still saying, I'm not worried, I trust you. And then everybody literally laughs in his face. I suppose they didn't actually turn around and laugh in his face. But anyway, Joe plays the idol for himself, which I honestly, I mean, like from his perspective, I think that's the smart move. Like at this point, like playing it for anyone else makes no sense, really, not for him. Huh. Because like he would have no way of knowing that Jessica had been the switch, but to try to save Cole, why?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like
no. And so the alternative wouldn't have been to play it for someone else. It would have been to not play it at all. But especially given that he was practically like deliberately trying to make himself a target during that tribal council, it's in alignment with his strategy. Especially since
that basically worked for him once before,
Yeah. Well, and it's like he said at the beginning, which I think was just 100% sincere and not a put on, which was, yeah, I found an idol and I played that one, and I found another one, I played it. I'm going to find an idol at every camp we go to.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, okay. Just try to dispute him.
So far,
that's what happened. Yeah. But so even given all of the different scheming, it was it still came down to a 5-5 tie before the final two votes turned the tide. But so I guess what I said earlier wasn't quite true. I said if one person flipped, it would have gone the other way. Technically, if one person flipped, it would have been a tie.
Right.
But nonetheless, still a narrow margin.
Right, and that's why they, did so much with like trying to show us Lauren and Ben as swing votes, because had they as a unit decided to go the other way,
mm-hmm.
that would have happened. So
yeah. Then Probst, I actually made a note of it just because I thought it was one of the more banal sign-offs that he's kind of ever done, which was just, it's not about who goes home, it's about who survives and the new lines that are drawn. And I'm like, I mean, those final lines are always a little generic, but
yeah, I mean, it's like, sure.
Yeah, it's like, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess so. It's about who survives on Survivor. Next time, apparently we had a scuffle over finding an idol. I've always kind of wondered, like we've established that we've learned in the past that there are rules in terms of like if someone finds the idol, it belongs to them. It cannot just be stolen by another player. There are rules about it, and I'm sure there are rules about physical violence against another player. But if two people are wrestling over an idol that they have just together found in the sand, I'm not sure how you resolve that. That's kind of a complicated situation from any rules standpoint, I'm sure. You know,
Yeah.
like if it's not obvious who gets their hand on it first.
Go to instant replay.
Yeah. I think what we need to do is tag all the castaways with RFID chips and make sure that the idol has a little, a little registry database that pings, which player registers first. But yeah, so it also they suggest, oh, the healers are doomed. And then poor Jessica. I never thought a game could crush you. I thought only guys could do that, which is kind of a weird note to go out on.
Yeah, didn't she say? I forget exactly what it was, but it was almost like, "Cole, call me." Like,
yeah, well, I hope we'll maybe go out on a date or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. It was weird.
That was so weird and sad.
Yeah, like
It made it so clear that was coloring her decision making, and
mm-hmm.
She probably could have done a lot better had she not got herself involved in that. Yeah.
A good friend of mine, one of the players in my So Many Levels D&D game, says frequently in situations like that, just sort of an, "Oh, honey," which is this expression of, you're hurting and I understand that, but come on. Yeah, I don't know. Jessica's nice, but she definitely came across as smart but very naive, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, so honestly, this going out like this was really only her fault, in the sense that it's kind of it's ultimately the consequence of having chosen her allies poorly.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, I think honestly, if I could have chosen to have her or Cole go out, I would have preferred Cole go out, but I can understand, and it makes sense how it went down. And I liked the smart play that resulted in it. Even if it was, sorry to see her go.
Yep.
All right. So that does it for this episode, I think. And we'll be back for this upcoming episode. Do we know yet if there's an episode on Thanksgiving week?
We do, but I don't remember.
Well, I don't then. We don't know.
Here in a second.
I think we definitely have one this week. I think.
Yes, we have them the 15th and the 22nd. So
okay,
yes.
So yeah, we do have an episode next week. However, I'm going to be in Colorado all next week. So actually, yeah, well, we'll sort that out. But I think we're going to try and record this for this week's episode on Thursday.
Potentially.
Yeah. So hopefully we'll be able to do that, and I'll try to get that posted before that Thanksgiving break, and we'll keep watching Survivor. So you keep watching Survivor too, and then listen or watch us.
Yes.
Watching us talking about Survivor to the top of our intelligence. Well said. All right. Good night, everybody.
All right.